Welcome to Desert Hearth. The morning Josie appeared at his fence, Caleb Morgan had been sitting on the porch steps for 2 hours watching a crow pick at something dead in the grass. He had not moved. He had not wanted to move. Moving required intention, and intention required caring, and caring required something he had quietly folded up and put away the day they buried his wife 18 months ago, and then folded away even further the day he sold the house in town and drove out here, to this 40 acres of hickory and silence, with nothing but a truck bed of tools and the stubborn idea that a man could disappear while still technically being alive. 13 days. That was how long it had been since he'd spoken to another human being. He had counted, not because the number mattered, but because counting was something to do. The feed store clerk had said, "Have a good one," and Caleb had nodded, which he told himself was not speaking, not really. So 13 days. The crow found what it was looking for and flew away, and Caleb thought, well, that's something. That's a whole story right there. Beginning, middle, end, short and clean and finished. That was when he saw her at the gate. She was small, maybe 7 years old, though something in the way she stood made that hard to trust completely. Children that age are usually fidgeting with something, pulling at their shirt, looking anywhere but at you. This girl was still. Her feet were bare and dirty, the left shin streaked with dried blood from a scrape that hadn't been cleaned. She was holding something to her chest, a bundle of wild herbs tied with a strip of cloth, cradling it the way a child carries something precious, the way you carry things that have taken effort to find. Her hair was dark and tangled, and her eyes, when she looked directly at him across the fence, were the kind of eyes you don't expect to find in a small face. Eyes that had done real watching. Eyes that knew how to read a room, or a person, or a silence. "You're the one who lives alone," she said. Not a question. A fact she had already verified. She had done her research, this small barefoot girl with blood on her shin, and he understood somehow that she had been working up to this moment for a while, that she had weighed it, that coming to the fence had cost her something. He set down his coffee cup on the step beside him. "I am," he said. His voice came out rough from disuse, like a door that needed oiling. "My mama needs help," she said. "She fell and she can't get up. I tried to help her, but she's too heavy and she won't let me go to town." She paused, and he could see her choosing the next words carefully, the way adults choose words when they're asking for something they don't want to ask for. "Please, mister, she's all I got." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the crow, about beginnings and middles and ends. He thought about 13 days of quiet, about how the quiet had started feeling like water he was living at the bottom of. He thought about his wife's hands, which was something he tried very hard not to think about, but they came to him anyway in moments like this. Her hands in the garden, soil under her fingernails, the particular way she'd look up at him when she heard him come through the back door, like his arrival was still, after all those years, good news. He stood up. He picked up his jacket from where it hung on the porch rail. He said, "Show me where." The girl's name was Josie. She offered this information on her own, about 30 seconds into walking, like she had decided he'd earned it. She led him not toward the road, but into the tree line at the eastern edge of his property, down a slope he'd never had reason to explore, following a trail that he realized only gradually was a trail at all. She knew every step of it. She moved through those woods the way you move through a place you have memorized, the way you move through your own house in the dark, confident, unhurried, certain. She stepped over a root before she reached it. She ducked a branch without looking up. The herbs she still held against her chest. He didn't ask about them. He followed her past the creek bend where the water ran shallow over flat gray stones, through a dense stand of cedar that smelled sharp and cold, up a small rise and then down the other side into a natural hollow he had not known existed on his own land, sheltered on 3 sides by the hillside, the 4th side facing a clearing where afternoon light came through clean and straight. The cabin was small, and it was real. Built of old timber, the kind that grays and hardens over decades into something nearly stone-like. A woodpile stacked against the left wall, neat and deliberate, each piece split to the same rough size. A kitchen garden along the south face, winter-thin now, but clearly tended, the soil turned and ready, with a few hardy greens still holding on in the cold. There were signs everywhere of a life organized against difficulty, a life that had thought through every detail of its own survival. Rope lines strung under the eave for drying, a rain barrel carefully positioned, mud packed around the base of the door frame to seal out drafts. Caleb stopped walking for just a moment, taking it in. 13 days of believing himself alone on this land, and all along there had been this. A home, a whole life tucked against the hillside, 60 yards from his eastern fence, invisible unless you knew where to look. He followed Josie inside. The woman on the floor was not old, though she looked like someone who had skipped softness and moved directly from youth into a kind of weathered endurance. She was perhaps 35, dark-haired like her daughter, with the same quality of stillness in her face that Josie had at the fence, the stillness of someone who has learned that panic is expensive and they cannot afford it. She was sitting against the wall beside the fireplace, one leg extended, her jaw set in a line that communicated clearly and without ambiguity that she did not want him here. A piece of firewood lay beside her that she had apparently been using to try to push herself upright. The ankle was visibly swollen, the skin around it shining and tight. "Mama," Josie said, "this is the man from the fence." The woman looked at him the way a person looks at a locked door, calculating, assessing, not yet deciding whether to try the handle. Her hands, he noticed, were in her lap, but her fingers were wrapped around a short-handled knife that she was not bothering to hide. "I don't need help," she said. Her voice was steady and unsurprised, as if she had prepared this sentence in advance and was delivering it as promised. "Your ankle disagrees," Caleb said. He didn't move further into the room, didn't step toward her. He stood where he was, hands loose at his sides, and he understood instinctively that the worst thing he could do right now was make himself large. "I'm Caleb Morgan. This is my land." A long pause. "I know whose land it is." "You've been here 3 years," he said. It wasn't an accusation. He said it the same way Josie had said, "You're the one who lives alone," like a fact he was simply confirming, one they both already knew was true. Something shifted in her face. Not fear, exactly, recalculation. She was deciding how much to give him, how much to hold back, whether this man standing in her doorway was a door opening or a door closing. Her fingers didn't loosen on the knife. "Ruth," she said. "My name is Ruth." "Ruth," he nodded. "Your daughter's shin needs cleaning. She's got a cut on it, and it's been sitting open. If you tell me where your supplies are, I can clean it while you sit there and be stubborn, and then we'll figure out your ankle." Josie looked at her mother. Ruth looked at Caleb. Something passed between all 3 of them in that small fire-lit room. Something that didn't have a clean name. Something in the category of, "All right then, let's see." And Ruth's hand slowly moved away from the knife. "Cabinet beside the stove," she said. "Cloth and the brown jar." He stayed 3 days. This was not the plan. The plan, insofar as he'd had one walking into those woods, had been to assess the situation, do what was necessary, and walk back to his porch and his silence and his 13 days of practiced emptiness. But ankle sprains don't care about plans. and a 7-year-old girl with a freshly cleaned shin and a collection of wild herbs she was cataloging in a small notebook doesn't particularly care whether a man wants to leave. Josie simply kept showing him things. The dried mushrooms hung in strings from the ceiling, the marks on the doorframe where she'd tracked her height since they arrived, the book of plant drawings she'd made herself, labeled in her own careful handwriting, some labels spelled correctly and some not, none of them apologetic about it. Ruth tolerated his presence the way cold ground tolerates the first thaw, grudgingly, with resistance, but with a certain acknowledgement that it was happening regardless. She let him bring in wood. She let him set her ankle with strips of cloth and a flat piece of shingle. She did not let him ask too many questions, and he respected this more than she might have expected him to, because he understood it. He understood building walls out of silence. He understood that sometimes the things you don't say are the load-bearing structures of your entire life. But on the second evening, after Josie had fallen asleep near the fire, wrapped in a quilt the color of old leaves, Ruth looked at him from across the small table where they'd been sitting in quiet and said, "You lost someone." He looked at her. "It's in how you move, like you're carrying something heavy in a place where there shouldn't be weight." She paused. "I'm not asking. I'm just saying I see it." He was quiet for a moment. The fire popped. "Her name was Clara," he said. 18 months ago. Ruth nodded, just once, the way you acknowledge a thing that has no good response, the way you say, "I hear you," without making it about you. She didn't fill the silence with condolences. She didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss," in the way people say it when they mean, "I don't know what else to say." She just let it sit there, what he'd said, let it have the weight and the space it deserved. And he was grateful for this, in a way he hadn't expected to be grateful for anything. "Why are you hiding?" he said. He asked it gently, not like a demand, the way you'd ask someone carrying a heavy thing if they needed help, knowing they might say no, giving them the right to say no. A long pause. The fire settled. "There are people who would take Josie from me," she said. "People who decided a long time ago that I wasn't fit, that I was the wrong kind of mother, living the wrong kind of life." She looked at her hands on the table. "I'm not the wrong kind of mother. I'm the only mother she has, and she's healthy, and she's loved, and she knows more about this land than most grown men ever will, but none of that would matter if they found us." She looked up at him. "So we stay found by no one." Caleb sat with that for a while. He thought about the neatly stacked woodpile, the kitchen garden, the plant notebook with its careful, imperfect labels. He thought about Josie standing at the fence, holding her herbs like a baby, saying, "Please, mister, she's all I got." The courage in that, the enormous, quiet, 7-year-old courage of stepping out of hiding because someone you loved needed you to. "Nobody knows about this hollow," he said. "I didn't know about it, and it's my land." Ruth looked at him. "You can stay," he said. "Nothing changes for you. I won't say anything to anyone. And if you need help, or Josie does, I'm 60 yards that direction." He paused. "I'm not doing you a favor. I'm telling you you're not alone out here unless you want to be. That's all." The fire burned down to orange coals. Outside, the wind moved through the cedars. Ruth was quiet for a long time, and he didn't press her, just let the offer sit there on the table between them, like something she could pick up or leave, entirely her choice. Finally, she said, "Josie likes you. She's a remarkable kid." "She is." A pause, and something in Ruth's face loosened, just slightly, the way ice loosens at the edges before it fully breaks. "She wouldn't have gone to you if she didn't trust you. She's never wrong about people. I've learned to listen to her." Caleb nodded. "Thank you," Ruth said, "for coming into the woods." She said it simply, without performance, the way you thank someone when you really mean it and don't need to make it elaborate. "Thank your daughter," he said. "She's the one who came to the fence." He walked back to his cabin on the morning of the fourth day. The air was cold and sharp, the kind of cold that means business, and the hickory trees were bare against a pale sky. He could see his breath. He walked the trail he had now learned well enough that he stepped over the root before he reached it, ducked the cedar branch without looking up, and he did not examine this too closely, the fact that he had learned this trail, the fact that it felt like something worth knowing. On his porch steps, his coffee cup was still where he'd left it, empty and cold. He picked it up and brought it inside. He made a fresh pot. He stood at the window while it brewed and looked out at the eastern tree line, at the hickory and cedar, at the slope leading down toward the hollow he had not known existed. He thought about what it means to disappear, how he had come out here planning to do exactly that, planning to let the silence take him down like water, like something that was happening to him, rather than something he was choosing. He had thought the silence was easier than memory. He had thought the quiet was a kindness to himself, and it had been for a while. It had been what he needed, the way a broken bone needs the cast, stillness and darkness and time. But bones heal. That is what they do. That is what they are built for. And there is a moment when the cast has to come off, not because the pain is gone, not because you've forgotten what broke you, but because the healing is of a kind that now requires movement, because a bone that never bears weight again is not truly healed, it's just protected. He thought about Josie's eyes over the fence railing. He thought about Ruth's voice saying, "Thank you for coming into the woods," plain and real. He thought about a small girl cataloging wild herbs in a notebook, doing it seriously, doing it like it mattered, because to her it genuinely did. He poured his coffee. He sat at the table. He did not count the days after that. Spring came slowly that year, the way spring comes after a hard winter. Tentative at first, a little mistrustful, testing the ground before committing. But it came. The kitchen garden along the south face of Ruth's cabin woke up before anything else, and Josie planted 3 new rows of something she wouldn't tell him about until they came up, because she wanted, she said, to surprise him. They were sunflowers. Tall, ridiculous, impractical, fully beautiful sunflowers, leaning toward the light the way all good things lean toward the light. And when Caleb saw them, he stood there for a moment longer than he meant to, feeling something in his chest that was almost too much, and also, somehow, exactly enough. Josie stood beside him with her herb notebook tucked under her arm and looked up at him with those old eyes in that young face. "Do you like them?" "Yeah, I like them a lot." She nodded, satisfied, and went to write something in her notebook. Ruth appeared in the doorway behind him, wiping her hands on a cloth, her ankle long since healed and forgotten. She looked at the sunflowers and then at him, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything. They had gotten good at that, at the particular kind of quiet that isn't emptiness, that isn't absence, the kind of quiet that is itself a form of trust, the kind you build slowly with small acts and honest words, and the courage to keep showing up, to stay in the story even when the story is hard, to follow a small girl down an unknown trail into the woods because something in her voice made it the only right thing to do. 60 yards between 2 lives, a fence, a gate, a child standing barefoot in the morning with blood on her shin and herbs in her arms and something enormous in her eyes. That is how it begins, the thing that saves you. Not with a great event, not with a declaration or a plan, just a small girl at a fence and a man who gets up from the steps. Just please, mister, and show me where, and everything that grows from that. Desert Hearth, where every story is a hearth, and every hearth is a home.